Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up between now and 4 o'clock. More Conservative MPs have submitted letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Economists reported the government whips are concerned that the threshold of 54 letters could be hit this week. Is it now a matter of when, not if, that the Prime Minister will face a vote of confidence? With the latest live from Westminster. An exclusive GB News investigation into accommodation for asylum seekers in the UK has found that the government is currently spending 5 million quid a day on how it can get a policy that actually works. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the battle for the Donbass is intensifying as Russia makes advancements towards the key city of Severinotsky. We'll be speaking to a military expert on what to expect in the coming weeks of that confrontation. And there's yet more travel chaos right across the UK. These scenes from Bristol Airport yesterday. People queuing for 4 hours simply to get through security. Is there an end in sight ahead of the busy summer period? And we'll be in Northern Ireland weeks after those elections. The DUP still blocking the election of the Northern Ireland's Assembly Speaker. We'll be finding out why. And as always, please do get in touch. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. All that and so much more. Busy programme between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, here's Rosie with the latest news.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, the Chancellor says that the plan unveiled last week to help with the cost of living crisis will make an enormous difference for the most vulnerable households. The consumer group Which, though, says more than 1 in 10 people have skipped meals due to rising food prices. They say surging living costs mean 57% of us are being forced to make adjustments, including cutting back on essentials, taking out loans or borrowing from family and friends. Rishi Sunak says he's aware these are difficult times, but believes millions of families across the country will benefit from support put in place.
Last week we announced £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living, with a third of all households, the most vulnerable, receiving around £1,200 in help. But there's also support available for everyone, including £400 off energy bills in the autumn. We said we would stand by the British people through this challenging time, and that's what we delivered last week.
A senior Ukrainian official says the latest European sanctions on Russia are not enough. The EU agreed last night to cut 90% of oil imports from Russia by the end of this year. The remaining 10% of imports will temporarily be exempt from that ban, so Hungary, Slovakia and Czech Republic will still have access to Russian oil. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU will diversify away from Russian fossil fuels with a particular focus on renewable energy.
The renewable energy has the big advantage that it is not only good for the climate, but it is also good for our independence and good for our security of supply, and it creates jobs at home.
A Conservative MP says he's taken the appropriate action to facilitate a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. John Stevenson says continuing criticism, revelations and questions are debilitating for the government. Earlier, former Cabinet Minister Andrea Leadsom told constituents that unacceptable failings of leadership found in Sue Gray's Partygate report cannot be tolerated and are the responsibility of the Prime Minister. 3 Conservative MPs have openly called for Mr Johnson to resign following the report. TUI Airways have announced they're cancelling 6 flights a day from Manchester Airport until the end of next month. EasyJet and British Airways have also been cancelling flights, while passengers at airports like Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester and Bristol are reporting long delays. The aviation industry is suffering from staff shortages after thousands were let go during the pandemic. The Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, says the government didn't ensure airports had the required staff levels.
Look, the government have been warned many months ago that losing skilled workers from the aviation industry would cause significant delays when people started going back on holiday. They knew that airports did not have the staff for security, for ground control, for cabin crew, and they knew that people would be going on holiday over the half term. So it's simply not good enough that people are having to wait hours and hours to get through security, and in some instances missing their flights and their holidays entirely.
He reached out to the government, who said they've changed the law over training new employees, which should help the industry fill vacancies more quickly. But the government made it clear that the aviation industry was responsible for making sure they had enough staff, and said the sector must step up recruitment. Now, at least 280 people have crossed the English Channel today in 8 small boats. After a lull in small boat activity due to bad weather in recent days over the Channel, the first boats today were spotted just after 6 a.m. Well, GB News' producer in Dover reports that around 50 of those taken off vessels were from Albania. Today's arrivals take the number of people who've crossed the English Channel this year to almost 10,000. That's significantly higher than the same time last year. You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. Very good afternoon to you. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your wireless radio as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, Boris Johnson is facing increasing hostility from his own MPs, with Tories whip said to be discussing how to fight back if Rebels trigger an all-important confident vote in the fallout from the Sue Gray's report into rule-breaking of the Downing Street parties from last week. A steady stream of Tories have backed the ballot to decide the Prime Minister's future, all called for Mr Johnson to step down immediately, with 3 new names surfacing yesterday and a 4th MP resubmitting a letter of confidence that he previously had withdrawn. And yet we've got more names today, including, as you just saw in the news bulletin, and Andrea Leadsom, who effectively has been quite critical, but we don't know whether she submitted a letter or not. Well, let's get the latest on all of this. Joining me now from Westminster is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, in a very wet Westminster, it should be said. I think William Hague, Lord Hague, today said that the fuse is getting shorter towards the dynamite, suggesting that it is now a matter of when, not if, the Prime Minister will face a vote of confidence. What do you think?
Well, you can choose your political metaphor, Darren. I mean, I might say that it's a very stormy day today here in Westminster, both in terms of the weather, but also in terms of the political weather. But yes, it does seem like, although the Prime Minister looked a lot safer last week, the trickle is growing, and that's the trickle of letters into the office of Sir Graham Brady. We're hearing more people who had misgivings about the Prime Minister write their letters, and it probably does not help that this week is, of course, recess, where MPs are back in their constituencies, the whips are a little bit further away, and potentially that's what's getting this drip, drip, drip of letters through the door. Now, we understand that Sir Graham Brady may not want to announce anything if the threshold has been reached until Parliament is sitting again. So potentially next week we may well be hearing something significant, although it's incredibly hard to tell. Of course, as famously as many people know, this letter total is secret. Not one person on this earth knows it aside from Sir Graham himself, and he keeps those letters in a locked safe in his office. So really we're doing a lot of guesswork when it comes to whether or not a no-confidence challenge will be mounted against the Prime Minister. However, we do know some history when it comes to these votes. We know that the last time a no-confidence vote was called in a Tory party leader, in Theresa May, back in December 2018, only around 30 MPs were public in saying their letter had gone in, when of course we knew it was over 50 that needed to have gone in to initiate that ballot. So we do know that some people don't announce their ballots, don't announce their letters to Sir Graham Brady, despite having them in. On the other side of the ledger, we do know that potentially there are some war games being played by Number 10, potentially some friendly MPs to the Prime Minister who may well have submitted a letter themselves, so that when Sir Graham Brady rings round and says, "Are you sure you want your letter in? We're close to the total, or we've reached the total. Are you double sure that you want your letter of no confidence in?" they could then withdraw them and buy the Prime Minister some breathing space. However, of course, 54 letters is not a huge proportion of the Tory party, given that there are 360-odd Conservative Party MPs, and there's a difference. There's a difference between the 54 needed to initiate a no-confidence vote and the over 180 votes needed for then the Prime Minister to lose, for a majority of Conservative MPs to vote no confidence in the Prime Minister once that ballot goes forward. So this is a multi-stage process, and even though the Prime Minister may well face a vote of no confidence, he may well win it, and therefore, under the current rules of the 1922 committee, be secure from another challenge for another year.
Problem for the Prime Minister in many ways, Tom. What happened, looking back again, as you've been doing with Theresa May, she of course survived that vote, didn't she? But the political damage from having a vote of confidence when a large number of your party in a secret ballot frankly say you're not up to the job, means that you're maybe not fatally wounded, but you're pretty damaged.
That's certainly the case. Theresa May limped on for another 6 months after that vote, and it wasn't until the European elections, when the Conservative Party crashed down to 9% in the polls in those European elections, coming behind the Brexit Party, behind the Lib Dems, behind the Labour Party, and indeed behind the Greens as well in those European elections. It wasn't until that point that Theresa May saw the writing on the wall. There were some threats to change the rules to the 1922 committee to initiate another vote, and at that point she walked. So I think to some extent that lesson shows that it's the electoral tests that might matter more in those sort of circumstances, and we know that we do have electoral tests, 2 of them, coming up on the 23rd of June, those 2 by-elections that may well be a moment of significant political danger for this Prime Minister.
Tom, as always, thank you very much. We'll let you get a little dry now in a very wet Westminster. Tom, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tom Harwood there. Outside Parliament, well, joining me now is the Conservative commentator. I think we're going to hear from Rishi Sunak, I think, first. He's been out and about the northeast of England, and he was asked about the U-turn on the windfall tax support for families, whether it come too late or not. Let's have a listen to what the Chancellor had to say.
Well, I know things are difficult for many and people are anxious about the months ahead, and that's why last week we announced £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living, with a third of all households, the most vulnerable, receiving around £1,200 in help. But there's also support available for everyone, including £400 off energy bills in the autumn. We said we would stand by the British people through this challenging time, and that's what we delivered last week.
But we have spoken to users of food banks in the northeast who say they're already in debt, they're already in arrears, and they feel this is just a sticking plaster. They need something long term.
Well, combined with the support that we've already announced, we've now put in place £37 billion worth of help, and that's going to make an enormous difference to people, particularly the most vulnerable. But it means, for example, together with all the other changes that we've made, a single mother with 2 children working full-time on the national living wage is going to get something like £2,500 extra this year to help cope with some of the challenges that they're facing. So I'm confident this will make a meaningful difference to millions of families across the country.
There you go, that Chancellor speaking a little earlier. Let's speak now to Conservative commentator Alex Dean, who joins us down the line. Alex, as always, good afternoon to you. James Forsyth, very respected political editor of The Spectator today, saying it is now a matter of when, not if, the Prime Minister faces this no confidence vote. Is that your sense as well?
He may be right, and I think I actually think the Spectator running total that they've got on their website is missing a couple of people who've confirmed they've put in their letters. So I think the real number is a bit higher than James and co are actually counting. That said, as we saw with Theresa May, as you were reflecting with Tom a little earlier, it can be quite hard to get to the totals required. And bear in mind, there's more Tory MPs now than there were under Theresa May, so you need a higher number. I'm not sure that it's a case of when, not if. If a vote does come about, I am sure that the Prime Minister will win it. But I agree with the conclusion from that you were reflecting on with Tom when you were speaking to him, which is that it wounds a Prime Minister per se to have a vote in their leadership, whether or not they win it.
Things this all come about because there was a sense, wasn't there, last week that Sue Gray's report wasn't quite as damaging as some had suggested. In fact, many Tory MPs publicly and privately expressed that. And yet, over the last week or so, many of them have clearly gone back to the constituencies and somewhat seem to have changed their mind. Or what's at play here, Alex?
I think some of it is to do with feedback from their associations in their constituency and from their own voters. Bear in mind, a number of the people who've voiced disquiet about the current state of play in Westminster are Conservative MPs who sit on majorities that are relatively small, where the second party are the Liberal Democrats, who've seemed to be making great hay out of recent events. And I bear in mind, too, that we've got two by-elections coming up that do not look great for the Conservative Party, both being fought for bad reasons, both in the southwest and in Wakefield. I think that the Conservative Party is looking in difficulties in both of those, and that kind of situation is quite a salutary one for sitting Tory MPs who worry about their own seats. I think there's a bit of that, whilst I do accept your premise that I think that the Sue Gray report didn't really change many minds. I think people who were in favour of the Prime Minister before remain in favour of the Prime Minister. People who hated the Prime Minister before still hate the Prime Minister. I don't think that the Sue Gray report really changed things for many people. And I also think, with regard to events in Number 10, a large number of Tory MPs would rather that we were able to move on from so-called Partygate, but they're being forced to come back because of media attention and because people raising it with them in their own patch. I think all of those things are at play.
Yeah, indeed, and the suggestions, of course, of a party in the Downing Street flat that wasn't investigated, and we've got that Standards Committee report as well. As you say, it's not going away. There's always been commentators, haven't there, Alex, that have suggested that the Conservative Party's relationship with Boris Johnson was quite transactional, i.e. he wins, they support him. When he stops winning, they will quickly withdraw the support. Do you think that's how some Conservative MPs at least are feeling when they look at these by-elections, when they look at the local election results?
I think the Conservative Party's relationship with every leader is transactional. The Conservative Party wants a leader that can win general elections, and if you can't do that, then your half-life in Number 10 or as leader, depending on where you are, can be measured in months, if not weeks. And I bear in mind that Sue Gray has emphasised that criticisms of the Prime Minister over so-called Partygate have been exaggerated. He's been fined once. He's not a serial offender, as the Metropolitan Police have emphasised and have held. None of this seems to be helping the Prime Minister. I can't help but note some of that might be because the media spotlight is so remorselessly on him. He might be rescued a little bit by events in Durham. He might be helped out by Beergate and some criticism of Keir Starmer. But short of that, it seems that the transactional relationship that you were implying will be tested once again. I, for what it's worth, think that the Prime Minister will win a confidence vote quite handsomely. As Tom was rightly pointing out to you, he's then insulated from a further challenge for some time to come. And who knows, perhaps we'll have a general election in that period. And in some people supporting Boris Johnson will be hoping that that's the case, because they will want him to be able to demonstrate his greatest apparent strength, which is in the country rather than in Westminster, is with electors rather than with the media. And if he can return another majority for the Tory party, then all of these concerns will go away. Because in the end, as you rightly imply, Tory MPs test their leaders on one thing. Are you going to win another majority?
And just very finally on that, Alex, I would suggest also one of his strongest cards, the Prime Minister's strongest card, is that, frankly, there's no obvious successor. Does the party want to drag itself through another leadership race when Not like in 2019 it was. When there was an obvious successor, which was Boris Johnson. That's not the case this time round.
Well, you can never write off the person that came second in a contest, and I think Jeremy Hunt is on manoeuvres. Whatever you think of a Hunt candidacy, Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister, stands in for the PM when he's not around, will plainly think that he's got a claim to the throne. There's a clutch of people who have support bases in the party, whether it be Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, Priti Patel, Sajid Javid. My point being, there's a number of people who have some support and indeed are good enough to be Prime Minister, which is to the credit of the Conservative Party. My own view is this PM ain't going nowhere for the time being.
Alex, as always, thank you very much indeed. Alex Dean there joining us down the line with a very well-stocked bookshelf behind him. OK, you're watching GB News. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Should the Prime Minister face a vote of confidence? Should he stay? Is this a story that's not going away? Are you angry about it? Do get in touch or tweet me at GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, though, we're going to have more on our exclusive story today about asylum accommodation. Mark White will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
GB News can reveal that up to 30,000 hotel rooms are being requisitioned by the Home Office every day to house asylum seekers as they wait for their claims to be processed. As the government grapples with what is a growing accommodation crisis, the first of up to 1,500 asylum seekers will move into an old RAF base in Yorkshire this week, which in the last few hours has been delayed due to a legal challenge. Locals in the adjoining village of Linton on Ouse have told our Home Affairs and Security editor Mark White that the plans are ill thought out and will end in disaster.
On the seafront in Eastbourne, this hotel would normally be home to some of the many tourists who visit this East Sussex resort. But these guests are not holidaymakers. They're asylum seekers, some of the tens of thousands who are currently placed in hotel accommodation. It's an understandably sensitive issue. As we filmed, this Home Office minder filmed us. Another tried to persuade the guests to go back inside. And as I tried to speak to some of them, I was told I couldn't.
They are not allowed to speak. They are guests.
Well, they are allowed to speak.
No, they can't give any statement to you.
That's official. You're telling us on behalf of the Home Office that these people are not allowed to speak to us. Is that what you're telling us?
You can speak. They are not know English.
Yeah, well, exactly. Thank you. In broken English, the two men told me they were both 27 and from Iran, but wouldn't say how they got to the UK. We've been told that every day around 30,000 hotel rooms across the country are requisitioned by the Home Office to house asylum seekers. It's costing close to £5 million each day and is clearly unsustainable. This hotel near Bristol Airport, another where business travellers and holidaymakers are unable to book their rooms. And when they ask why, as John Northfield did, they're simply told to contact the Home Office.
I actually booked it through booking.com, and they said if I wanted an explanation I would have to try and contact the hotel direct, which I did try and do that, but obviously they weren't very forthcoming as to why the hotel was being closed for 12 months.
The need for radical solutions prompted the move to adapt this old RAF base at Linton on Ouse in North Yorkshire for use as an accommodation centre. But its close proximity to the village of Linton on Ouse has enraged locals like Catherine Dryden, who fears that an influx of bored young men is just asking for trouble.
They are going to be bored out of their schools. There is no infrastructure in this village. We're a very small, tight-knit community. Yes, we will be welcoming them and speak to them, absolutely not a problem, but that is not enough. What are these people going to do?
Despite the understandable local anxiety, if the government can make a success of the asylum accommodation centre here, it could pave the way for other similar camps. You only need to walk through the centre of this village to see exactly what locals fear in terms of their community being completely overrun. It's tiny. The main street here has one shop and not much else. So with the prospect of hordes of young men hanging around here, the concern is understandable. Those worries are being compounded by several incidents of concern in some areas where asylum seekers have been housed, including this one in Windsor, where a group of schoolgirls videoed as they were propositioned by a couple of asylum seekers.
You know we're 15?
Yeah, how old are you?
21.
You know we're 15?
Who?
Us. Oh my, we're 15.
He likes me.
You're 21 and you're asking for our snaps. We're 15.
Walk on, bruv, walk on. They're young girls, brother, walk on.
Thames Valley Police has confirmed it's investigating this incident. Olga Matthias, who's campaigned against the Linton on Ouse centre, believes it's been ill thought out and will end in disaster.
Something appalling, or several appalling somethings will happen. The Home Office has no track record of successfully delivering any policy that they've invented. And I use the word invented deliberately because this has definitely not been thought through.
The issue of where to accommodate the growing number of asylum seekers is a major headache for the government. Last month, every local authority in the country became part of the National Dispersal Scheme, which will see even more of their housing stock used to accommodate asylum seekers. The pressure on housing stock, on hotels, the need to adapt old military bases will continue as long as the small boats keep coming across the channel. And for the moment at least, there's no end in sight to that. Mark White, GB News.
And Mark joins us now, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Mark, good afternoon to you. Just bring us up to date with this development in the last couple of hours, this legal challenge that may well delay the movement of these refugees to this old RAF base.
Yeah, confirmation from the Home Office that here in Linton-on-Ouse, the RAF base, which is just about 100 yards from where I am, the asylum seekers who were due, the first batch of them, about 60, who were due to go in today, that is not now happening. It is on pause. We don't know for how long it is on pause, but it's due, we're told, to the fact that there is the potential for legal action. They've been put on notice, the Home Office, by the local authority here in this area about the potential for legal action and the various points that the local authority intends to raise in any court proceedings. So the Home Office is taking time out, if you like, to examine those points that the local authority is making. And combined with that, there have been some logistical issues as well, which is also delaying the arrival of asylum seekers here. So the locals here, they're not celebrating. They know that the Home Office still fully intends to put these 1,500 asylum seekers here, but it may be some while yet.
Been reporting on the fact that 280 people have crossed the channel today, 8 small boats. Takes the number to over, I think, 10,000 across the year.
Yeah, and this absolutely highlights the depth of the crisis that the government is facing in terms of asylum accommodation. That's another 282 people who are going to be housed. Now, at the moment, many of them are being housed in hotel rooms. We found out that 30,000 hotel rooms are being requisitioned every single day by the government at a cost of almost £5 million a day in housing them. In addition to that, local authorities are being told that they've got to provide more of their council housing stock for asylum seekers, and that's forcing, of course, the governments as well into looking at more radical solutions like the setting up, repurposing of old military bases like the one here at RAF Linton-on-Ouse and other sort of former military bases and government establishments. So if this works out, and the villagers here don't think it will, they think it will end in disaster, but if it does work out, it could be a model, the government hopes, for other such centres across the country that would allow them in a more sort of cost-effective way to house these asylum seekers as they're being processed.
Mark, of course, this all at the same time as the government are insistent that they still want to send many asylum seekers to Rwanda, but thus far that has not happened.
Well, that's another issue, of course, which is also hitting a delay because although we're told 100 of these asylum seekers have been told that they're on notice to go to Rwanda. They're now expecting court challenges that could actually tie this up in legal knots for many weeks, if not months ahead. So it could be some time, if ever, before anybody ever heads to Kigali. And, you know, until that happens, the government's not going to know whether this Rwandan proposal is offering any kind of deterrent to the thousands of people who are still making that dangerous journey, as they did today, across the English Channel.
OK, Mark, as always, thank you very much indeed. That's Mark White there, Home Affairs and Security Editor, joining us from Linton-on-Ouse. Thank you, Mark. OK, you're watching GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about the travel chaos, the battle for Donbass in Ukraine, and what precisely is happening in Northern Ireland. All that between now and 4. But first, a little after 3:30, it's back to Rosie for the headlines.
It's 3:33. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright here on GB News. The Chancellor says that the plan unveiled last week to help with the cost of living crisis will make an enormous difference for the most vulnerable households. Consumer group Which says more than 1 in 10 of us have skipped meals due to rising food prices. Rishi Sunak says he's aware these are difficult times, but believes millions of families across the country will benefit from the support put in place.
Last week we announced £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living, with a third of all households, the most vulnerable, receiving around £1,200 in help. But there's also support available for everyone, including £400 off energy bills in the autumn. We said we would stand by the British people through this challenging time, and that's what we delivered last week.
The EU agreed last night to cut 90% of oil imports from Russia by the end of this year. The remaining 10% of imports will be temporarily exempt from that ban, so that Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic will still have access to Russian oil. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU will diversify away from Russian fossil fuels with a particular focus on renewable energy.
The renewable energy has the big advantage that it is not only good for the climate, but it is also good for our independence and good for our security of supply, and it creates jobs at home.
TUI Airways have announced they're cancelling 6 flights a day from Manchester Airport until the end of next month. EasyJet and British Airways are also cancelling flights, while passengers at airports like Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester and Bristol are all reporting long delays. The aviation industry is suffering from staff shortages after thousands were let go during the pandemic. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.263 to the dollar. The pound is 1.175 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,467.42 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to GB News and the briefing. It is coming up to 22 minutes to the top of the hour to 4 o'clock. We're online on TV and indeed on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company on this Tuesday afternoon. Do get in touch, by the way, gbviews at gbnews.uk. A lot of people very animated about Boris Johnson and that possible vote of confidence. We will give you some of those views a little later on. But first, let's turn to Ukraine, because Russian troops now say they control around half of the Ukrainian city of Severodonetsk, with British intelligence warning that Russia gains are being held. The country is focusing on what it calls liberating the eastern Donbass region as part of a special military operation, as the Kremlin brands it, which everyone else calls a war, of course, after they've faced stiff Ukrainian resistance. Where are we at with the conflict on the ground? Joining me now is Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. No doubt that the Russians in the last week or so have made progress in the Donbass region.
Well, they've certainly made more progress in Luhansk, one of the two regions in Donbass. It's worth saying, of course, that there are only 2 of the 24 oblasts or provinces in Ukraine, and there's still a lot of trading of space for time by the Ukrainians. And I think that's what you're going to see around Severodonetsk, which is their main axis at the moment, where there is sluggish progress. To the west of Severodonetsk is a river, which they've got to get across. It seems that the Ukrainians are there fighting a delaying battle to a place called the Chansk, which is on higher ground. So I think they're making sort of small incremental progress. This isn't war winning, and we shouldn't be too gloomy about what the Russians are doing at the moment from a Ukrainian perspective. As long as they're continued to be supported politically, militarily and economically, then Ukraine still have a chance in the longer term.
And this at the same time as I've been reading reports today about the use of tanks, essentially, and suggestions the Russians may have lost up to 1,000 tanks. I think that's what the Pentagon is suggesting. And then in the end, if it carries on like this, they will simply run out of tanks.
Yeah, they've got 2 problems, really. The first one is they're mobilising equipment which is pretty old, T-62 tanks, and the 62 gives you an indication of when they first were fielded, 1962. And if you've got, as long as you supply the Ukrainians with anti-tank weapons which will penetrate that armour, which is very old armour, then they can be taken out. And secondly, they're only really doing a silent mobilisation of manpower. They cannot, in a societal context, go to a full mobilisation and call this a war, because there are risks to Putin if he does that. So again, there is potential downstream for a culmination to the Russian perspective. And by that, we mean that they'll have no offensive power left. That doesn't mean that they won't then dig in, and it'll be for the Ukrainians to try and get them out, because it's easier to defend than attack. And if there is to be a Ukrainian counteroffensive, that won't be on the cards for a while, probably mid to late summer. So we see this being really prolonged at the moment. I don't see the Russian army at the moment in a posture of collapse, though that is the part of the that you cannot pull the wool over the soldiers' eyes if things are going sluggishly and ultimately badly.
Indeed, and we have to remember, of course, the Russians, while not officially the Russian rebels have been dug in parts of the Donbass region for quite a long time, for years and years and years. Just finally, Chip, let's turn to the south, if we can, to the city of Kherson, which was, I think, the first major city to be captured by the Russians. But the Ukrainians are suggesting that they are starting to make progress to try and recapture that city.
Yeah, I do think there is a limited counterattack going on there. And of course, the significance of Kherson is really twofold. The first one is this propensity for the Russians to have some sort of referendum there to say that this is now ours. That won't happen if it's under attack. And secondly, it should have been the sort of staging point to go towards Odessa. And they've really run out of offensive power there. That is, they have culminated in the area around Kherson and are on the defensive there. So they've not got no momentum to go further to the west in Kherson, and that's the significance in an operational sense in the military campaign.
Chip, as always, great analysis. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Chip Chapman there from Salisbury. Now, travel chaos. Half-term is upon us, and that chaos is continuing. The airline TUI today announcing it's cancelling nearly 200 flights over the next month. Airlines are struggling, of course, with passenger volumes over the half-term and the special long Jubilee weekend, as well as still continuing with the staff layoffs they experienced during the pandemic. A government minister this morning said the Department for Transport had spent months warning the travel sector about the need to prepare for the increase in demand. That seems to have fallen on deaf ears. One of those airports facing major delays is in Bristol. Our South West reporter Jeff Moody is there. Jeff, and we saw massive queues at security yesterday, up to 4 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, more. I mean, it's been funny standing here watching everybody arrive all day. You see the look of excitement in people's faces. You know, they're all set for their holiday. People have got their shades on, their shorts on. But then when you walk into the departure lounge and you see them half an hour or so later, they're not quite so excited. Carnage, they're calling it. Some people are saying it's like a zoo in there, and it is. It's hot, it's sticky, it's full of people. Everybody's been queuing hours and hours and hours, not getting very far, and patience is really running out. Yes, thank you for that. But despite that, people are trying to stay cheerful in places. Bristol Airport did initially issue a phone line for people to ring if they were worried about their flights, but that didn't really work because everybody phoned at exactly the same time, so nobody could get through. Bristol Airport are saying, well, they knew it was going to be busy. Of course they did. They're expecting 300,000 people to descend on this airport during this week for the Jubilee weekend. But what they didn't expect was the delays and the cancellation of flights. But the other thing they didn't expect was the fact that people have been looking at reports, they've been noticing that there's an issue, so they've been coming as early as they can. Well, you would, wouldn't you? If there's delays in flights, you'd get there as early as possible. And that means people are getting here 5 hours, 6 hours before their flights. And what that means is they're just hanging around the airport and they're exacerbating that problem. There's so many people packed into a very short space. Bristol Airport, we asked them if they would come and talk to us about it. They said that they'd love to, but they are a bit too busy at the moment. Understandably, there's a lot for them to do today. And they are seeming to get a bit of a hang of it as the time goes on. It's not so bad in there as it was first thing this morning. Still a bit of a mess, though.
Indeed, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Glad to see Bristolians, though, are as excited as everyone else about people appearing on television. Say hello to them. Thank you very much indeed, Jeff Moody there, our reporter at Bristol Airport. Now, let's turn to Northern Ireland, because the Vice President of Sinn Féin, Michelle O'Neill, has said that efforts to resurrect the Assembly there at Stormont will continue. It comes after the DUP blocked a second attempt to elect a new Speaker. The DUP is maintaining its position that it wants to see action from the UK government over the Northern Ireland Protocol before it backs a new Speaker, which would enable the Assembly to start fully functioning again. It described the recall of the Assembly yesterday as simply a stunt. Well, let's bring in the former Deputy Leader of the DUP, that is Lord Nigel Dodds, who joins us down the line. Lord Dodds, Nigel, thank you very much for joining us. A stunt, why are you blocking the election of a Speaker?
Well, the Stormont Assembly is part of the institutions of the Belfast Agreement, and that agreement has been trashed by the Northern Ireland Protocol. The East-West relationship between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom has been disrupted by barriers to trade, by laws being imposed on Northern Ireland without any say of any elected representative in Northern Ireland, and all of that is contrary, not just to democracy, it's contrary to the United Kingdom, to the Union itself, and it's contrary to the Belfast Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement. So in our view, that has got to be sorted out before we can have all of the institutions working properly. The government and the people are aware of our position. That's the mandate that we received in the recent election. So we're simply fulfilling our mandate and urging the government to act now quickly to resolve the problem of the protocol, and then we can look forward to getting the institutions up and running again.
But aren't you in some ways holding the people of Northern Ireland are hostage here? I mean, the Stormont Assembly is not linked to the protocol in any meaningful way. It's only linked because you wanted it to be. The people of Northern Ireland want to see the Assembly back up and running. I don't understand this. You're almost holding Stormont to hostage, if you like.
Well, a couple of things there. You're wrong, of course, because the Northern Ireland Assembly is linked intimately and inextricably with the protocol, because the checks that have to be done on goods, the barriers to trade between Britain and Northern Ireland, actually has to be overseen by Northern Ireland ministers. So, Darren, the facts are, despite what you say, that the Assembly is intimately linked to the protocol. And of course, the Belfast Agreement, of which the Assembly is part, has been trashed by the protocol because there are three strands to the agreement: the Northern Ireland Assembly, the North-South relationships, so Strand 2, and Strand 3 is the relationship between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And that has been severely interrupted and disrupted by the protocol, which is causing economic problems, political problems, and a democratic deficit in Northern Ireland. So these things are totally linked. And indeed, we sought a mandate at the last election precisely on this issue. So we have a mandate and we have a cause. And it should also be borne in mind that Sinn Féin kept the Assembly down, didn't elect a Speaker between 2017 and 2020 for 3 years in order to achieve political objectives which were never as important as this issue is for Unionists, which is, in our view, an existential threat both to democracy and to the union of Northern Ireland with Great Britain.
But can you trust the British government? Can you trust the Prime Minister? Can you trust Boris Johnson to sort all of this out? This is the same Prime Minister who claimed there was never going to be a border in the Irish Sea.
Well, what we're doing isn't based on trusting anyone. We're going to wait until we see action. We're going to wait until we see this protocol is sorted out. So we're not taking anybody on trust or anything on trust. As far as we are concerned, it is a choice between the Belfast Agreement and its institutions, and this protocol was supposed to protect all of that. Instead, it's destroying it. And it's a matter of getting back to protecting those institutions, or else people will want to preserve the protocol. That's the choice that Boris Johnson, the rest of the UK political parties, and everybody else, the EU included, has. But we're not taking anything on trust. We're going to judge people by their actions. We have heard that there's going to be legislation introduced as early as next week, perhaps, in the House of Commons. We'll look at that legislation and then we'll see how it proceeds through Parliament. And then we will judge whether or not the protocol has been dealt with in a way which restores A, democracy, B, the union of Great Britain with Northern Ireland, and C, the Belfast Agreement in all its aspects.
OK, well, we'll have to wait and see. As you say, that legislation, government keep promising it's going to be published. We will wait for that. Lord Dodds, Nigel, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Let's speak now to Amanda Ferguson, journalist based in Northern Ireland. We know, don't we, Amanda, if there was to be a vote in the Northern Irish Assembly tomorrow, probably a majority of MLAs would vote for the protocol, wouldn't they? But not Unionists, and that's why it's a problem. There has to be consent.
Yes, I think one of the issues with what Lord Dodds has said is that the arrangements that are in place now doesn't trash the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement remains in place. Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom unless and until people would vote for any different in a democratic vote. I think what we're seeing unfolding at Stormont is the other parties trying to hold the DUP's feet to the fire, because the DUP would argue that they have a mandate to stay out of government, but the other parties would argue that they have a mandate to be in government. None of the parties think that the protocol is perfect, but they all indicate that they would prefer a negotiated outcome to deal with the issues that are in place. And even the Ulster Unionist Party, which is also a unionist party, and it doesn't like the protocol any more than Lord Dodds does, but they would argue that there should be devolved government on one hand and the EU and the UK working out the details of how to finesse the protocol on the other hand.
Amanda, in Northern Ireland, about the fact that there is no assembly yet again. I mean, there's hardly been an assembly for the last 5 years. Are people frustrated that local politicians are not governing them, if you like? That's back to direct rule almost.
Well, Northern Ireland's a complicated place, and Stormont's actually been collapsed for a third of its lifetime. The last time was over the RHI scheme, the botched green energy scheme. Sinn Féin, the late Martin McGuinness, collapsed the institutions in 2017. Now, the Sinn Féin argument would be that no government could have sustained a financial scandal of that magnitude. And then the final straw that broke the camel's back as such was when Paul Givan withdrew funding for an Irish language scheme for disadvantaged children. pension. Now, there was a deal on the table in 2018 to restore that. So there's a bit of an argument going on between the DUP and Sinn Féin about who's responsible for the 3-year impasse. I don't think there's going to be a meeting of minds when it comes to that. When it comes to the public in Northern Ireland, most people voted for parties that wanted to get back to devolved government straight away to deal with the cost of living crisis and the health service crisis and so on. Everybody acknowledges that there are issues with the protocol, but there doesn't appear to be majority support for the course of action that the DUP is taking at the moment. And I think that when you're explaining, you're losing, and the DUP is having to do an awful lot of explaining at the moment. What we saw with the recall of the Assembly and forcing politicians to vote again, to try to get the Speaker elected, to move on to get First Ministers elected, the DUP had to be in the chamber there to explain themselves. And my understanding is that that could happen, that recall process could happen as many times as the other parties wanted to do that. And I think that the longer that this goes on, the more difficult it's going to be for the DUP, and they'll be hoping that the UK government introduces some sort of unilateral action in the next week or two. But I think that all of the parties, or all of the interested parties, whether it be the EU, the UK government, the Irish government, the local political parties, have all stated that they feel a negotiated outcome would be best for the people of Northern Ireland. So really the DUP is out there, with the Tories in regards to introducing unilateral.
Yeah, I'm going to have to see how those negotiations go. Amanda, as always, thank you. Amanda Ferguson there joining us from Belfast. Coming up to 4 o'clock, that means one thing. Colin Brazier, who's on air until 6, join me in the studio. Colin, good afternoon.
Darren, hi.
What's coming up?
All the usual stuff, plus a couple of food items, which I think will catch some eyes. We've got the creator of a pizza vending machine. Oh, yes, it exists. It's going to be installed in Portsmouth. There are cries of obesity from various campaigners.
Could be tasty, though.
Well, tastier argument than our other item, which focuses on 4 schools in South Wales who are going to be used as guinea pigs for fried crickets. Edible
yes, I saw
insects.
this.
But wait for it, Darren.
Good sources of protein.
We've got some in
the
studio.
So it's going to be like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here.
I haven't decided yet.
I think you have to.
I don't have to do anything. I'm a great supporter of the British food industry. How does that sit comfortably with eating fried crickets?
But it's probably fast food and it's good for you. It's like eggs.
Will you eat some?
I'm very happy to eat some. In fact, I've actually had some in a restaurant.
Have you honestly?
They were quite tasty, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they were.
Heavens above. So we've got that. Plus, I'm going to have a rant about Tony Blair. I think you did the story yesterday. Tony Blair maybe thinking about return to politics. 25 years since 1997. New Labour and all that. I'm looking at his legacy as it's still emerging. Things like student numbers, the Equalities Act, immigration.
And, of course, Iraq.
Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. Have a listen now.
We will. From 4, thank you very much indeed. That's it from me for today. Back, of course, at 3 tomorrow. Colin is up next. We'll leave you with the weather. Frankly, sunshine and showers. Have a nice afternoon.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. As we head towards the Jubilee weekend, the weather is turning a lot drier, and for most of us, warming up a little bit as well. High pressure is trying to move in. It is going to be a slow process, however, and for the time being, this low is sitting right over us. It's been providing heavy showers for the past couple of days, and still a few lively downpours around this evening, particularly over eastern England and southeast Scotland. The showers should be fading here. We'll keep some cloud and some outbreaks of rain feeding into eastern Scotland. Wet weather across Northern Ireland will clear and push into Wales and northwest England through the early hours. As skies clear in many places, temperatures tumble. A chilly one for Wednesday morning. Temperatures in some rural parts of the southeast may not be far off freezing as we start June. There will be some June sunshine around, though, in the morning. Not so much over the Midlands. Quite a lot of cloud here and outbreaks of rain. Should brighten up through the day for Wales, sunny spells for Northern Ireland, and not as many showers to come tomorrow across Scotland. And by and large, a fine day in southwest England. It will again be northern and eastern England that see showers, again, some of them heavy. And again, temperatures mostly around the mid-teens, but warming up a little bit across the south. 19, 20 Celsius is possible. Still a few showers then through Wednesday evening, but look, they are fading, they're disappearing, leading into what will by and large be a fine day on Bank Holiday Thursday for the Jubilee. Most places, yes, maybe starting a little fresh, perhaps a little mist and fog here and there, but plenty of sunny spells for England,